this, what is it like to be the former governor of New Mexico? This last weekend, I was doing my 15th bicycle ride across New Mexico, picking up trash, and guy stops in his car. He says, "What's with the trash? What's with the bikes?" I said, "Well, I've been doing this now for 15 years." He goes, "You used to be Gary Johnson, didn't you?" I still am. No, what is the biggest difference of governor, former governor? Right now in New Mexico, people wave at me with all 5 fingers, not just one. I am a proud father of 2 really great kids, Saya and Eric. I am also an entrepreneur. Since I've been 17, I've paid for everything that I've had in my life. I started a construction company in 1974 as a one-person handyman, and in 1994 actually had 1,000 employees, electrical, mechanical, plumbing, pipe fitting. American dream come true, you know, hard work, being on time, doing what you say you're going to do for people. That's me. And I'm also an athlete. You would be hard-pressed to find somebody more fit than I am at 55 years old. I have a goal to climb the highest mountain on each continent. I was fortunate enough to climb and summit Mount Everest in 2003. When I ran for governor of New Mexico, I had no prior political experience, none. I introduced myself to the Republican Party a couple of weeks before I announced, and what they said was, "Hey, we like you, we like what you've got to say, but you need to know that you will never win. It's not possible to come from completely outside of politics and win this office." How did I do it? Well, I paid for my own campaign, first of all. New Mexico is 2-to-1 Democrat. I'm a Republican. I got elected. I promised to bring a common sense business approach to state government. I promised to put the issues that should be on the front burner on the front burner. And I got elected. And it was a wonderful experience. During my re-election, I ended up debating my opponent 28 times. In two runs for governor, I never mentioned my opponent in print, radio, or television. It was a positive campaign. I had a Mr. Smith Goes to Washington experience. I had a Ron Paul experience as governor of New Mexico. We were really successful. Not one single tax increase over 8 years. That had never happened before in the state of New Mexico. Now, New Mexico's 2-to-1 Democrat versus Republican. So, again, this was something that was tested all the time. When I left office, we had 1,000 fewer state employees than when I took office. Now, this was a promise that I made, and it was a real testament to state government employees that they were more efficient to be able to do the things that were called on them to do. Again, a testament to state government employees, but we didn't fire anybody. We just managed the attrition. In New Mexico, prisons were a huge issue. I had promised to put the issues that should be on the front burner, regardless of the political consequence, because there wasn't going to be a political consequence. I wasn't a politician. But we privatized half the prisons in the state at 2/3 the cost, and I would argue best product, best service, lowest price, and that's what we did. In the case of Medicaid, which is out of control in the state of New Mexico and every state in the country, in New Mexico we gave every single person on Medicaid the same health insurance policy that I had as governor of New Mexico, saved hundreds of millions of dollars. Of course, it was court tested, and the court tossed it out as not being good enough on many occasions. 4-lane, 500 miles of 4-lane highway in the state of New Mexico. No tax increases. More money for education as a percentage of the budget. This was something that I promised that I would do, but what I found out was that what we really needed to do was we really needed to bring competition to public education, and so advocated vouchers, full-blown voucher program for the entire state for 4 years. I did that. I took a very publicized stand against the war on drugs. Half law enforcement, half the courts, and half the prisons deal with our war on drugs. And to what end? We're arresting 1.6 million people a year. I'm going to guess that there are 10 million Americans today who have prison records that, but for our drug laws, would otherwise be tax-paying, law-abiding citizens. I would ask that all of you look at the issue. Look at the issue, get on the internet, and see if you don't come to the same conclusion that I have, and that is that 90% of the drug problem is prohibition-related, not use-related, and that's not to discount the problems with use, but that ought to be our focus. I have advocated the legalization of marijuana, and I've advocated harm reduction strategies for all these other drugs. This is a health problem, not a criminal justice problem, and it's never going to be legal to do drugs and do harm to anybody else. When I left office, we were in the black. I was able to cut the rate of, and I say I was able to because I really feel like I had a part in this. I was able to cut the state of the rate of government growth in half. The legislature really thwarted me on dozens and dozens of issues that I had. They thwarted me on school vouchers, which again, I advocated a full-blown statewide program for vouchers 4 straight years. They thwarted me on tax reductions of all sorts, income tax reduction being first and foremost. They thwarted me on the state's pension, taking the state's pension plan from a defined benefit to a defined contribution plan, much like Social Security today. They vetoed me on right to work. They vetoed me on repeal of Little Davis-Bacon. Why don't we build 4 schools instead of 3 schools? They thwarted me on the elimination of dozens of boards and commissions. They thwarted me on term limits. I believe in term limits. They vetoed me on tort reform. They vetoed me on really tougher DWI legislation, making people personally responsible for their actions. I had the most contentious relationship of any governor to their legislature in this country. They thwarted me on dozens of my issues. I vetoed 750 bills while I was governor of New Mexico over an 8-year period. To put that into perspective, that was vetoing more bills than the other 49 governors in this country combined. A la Ron Paul, huh? I vetoed dozens of tax increase bills. I vetoed hundreds of bills that we just couldn't afford. I vetoed dozens of bills that would have created new boards and commissions. I vetoed a lot of corporate legislation that would have benefited a few and not all. And I don't want to name names, but Quest Communications comes to mind. Put on the bandana. Come here to rob you. I vetoed campaign finance legislation, you know, legislation that would prevent a Gary Johnson from ever getting elected again. I vetoed hate crime legislation. Hate crime legislation scares me to death. Absolutely scares me to death. We're going to leave the government to arbitrate a motive in a